Montana Territory, 1873. Isaac Whitman believed in three things: his horse, his gun, and himself, in that order. The West had taught him that trust was a fool's luxury, love an even greater folly. At 25, he'd seen enough of mankind's cruelty to know that the frontier was a place for survival, not sentiment. The scars on his knuckles told stories of fights he'd won. The one across his heart, invisible but deeper, reminded him of everything he'd lost. "A man stands alone out here," he muttered to his chestnut gelding as they approached the dusty outpost of Silver Creek. "That's how he stays alive." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the single street of the settlement, glinting off the weathered sign of Hargrove's General Store. Isaac's lean frame sat easy in the saddle, his shoulders broad beneath a faded blue shirt, his eyes, sharp as a hawk's, taking in every detail. He hadn't planned to stop, but his supplies were running low, and the mountains ahead promised little in the way of civilization for the next 100 miles. What Isaac wanted was simple: to reach his uncle's abandoned claim near the Canadian border, rebuild the cabin, and carve out a life far from other people's troubles. What he needed, though he'd deny it with his dying breath, was something to fill the hollow ache that had followed him since the war ended, a purpose beyond mere existence. As he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, the sound of raised voices drew his attention to the auction block at the far end of the street. A small crowd had gathered, mostly men with hard eyes and harder expressions. Isaac would have turned away. Other folks' business was their own, but a flash of cornflower blue caught his eye, and despite himself, he looked. The woman standing on the block couldn't have been more than 20. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple knot, though tendrils had escaped to frame a face that, even streaked with dust and fatigue, struck Isaac as uncommonly lovely. She wore a once fine dress of cornflower blue, now travel-worn and mended in several places. But it was her eyes that held him, defiant, clear, and unafraid despite her circumstances. "Next up, contract of indenture for Miss Hannah Fairchild," called the auctioneer, a portly man with a greasy hat and greedy eyes. 5 years' service to pay off her father's debts and passage west. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, all the womanly arts, gentlemen. Bidding starts at $50. Isaac knew he should walk away. This was the frontier's cruel economy at work, nothing he hadn't seen before. Yet his boots remained rooted to the dirt street as several miners and a saloon owner began calling out bids. The woman's chin lifted slightly higher with each shout, but her eyes revealed the terror she fought to hide. $75, called a burly man with a scar across his nose, the owner of the Silver Nugget Saloon. His leer left little doubt about what kind of service he had in mind. Something in Isaac snapped. Before he could consider the wisdom of his actions, he was striding toward the auction block, hand raised. $1, he called out, his voice clear and steady. The crowd fell silent, then erupted in laughter. "Boy, you best move along," the auctioneer said. "We've got serious bidders here." Isaac withdrew his Colt revolver and spun the cylinder. The metallic click silenced the crowd instantly. "I said $1, he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "And I'll add that the lady doesn't appear to be merchandise. She appears to be a person." The sheriff, a weathered man with tired eyes, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. "Put the gun away, son. This is legal business." The lady signed the papers herself to cover her father's debts. Isaac's eyes flicked to Hannah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Then I'm making a legal bid," Isaac said, holstering his revolver and withdrawing a silver dollar from his pocket. He flipped it to the auctioneer. $1. Anyone wants to bid higher, they're welcome to try. His hand rested casually on his holster. No one spoke. The auctioneer looked to the sheriff, who simply shrugged. "Sold," the auctioneer announced reluctantly, for $1. The crowd dispersed, grumbling, while the scarred saloon owner spat in the dirt near Isaac's boots. "You'll regret that, cowboy," he muttered as he walked away. Isaac ignored him, focusing instead on Hannah as she descended the steps of the auction block. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and a steadiness in her gaze that spoke of a strong spirit. "I suppose I should thank you, mister," she said, her voice carrying a hint of southern gentility beneath its weariness. "Whitman. Isaac Whitman," he replied, suddenly uncomfortable with the situation he'd created. And no thanks necessary. I'll tear up your contract. You're free to go where you please. Hannah's blue eyes widened. Tear it up? But that's not how indenture works. The debt remains. Isaac frowned. I don't need a servant. What you need, Hannah said with unexpected frankness, is someone to cook your meals and mend your clothes, judging by the state of them. She gestured to the frayed cuffs of his shirt. I honor my obligations, Mr. Whitman. You paid $1 for 5 years of service. I intend to provide it. And just like that, Isaac's solitary plans disintegrated. He'd wanted no complications, no responsibilities beyond himself. Now he'd acquired both in the form of a golden-haired woman with eyes that challenged everything he thought he knew about surviving alone. I'm heading north, he said tersely. Rough country. No place for a woman. Hannah finished, her chin lifting again in that defiant gesture. Mr. Whitman, I buried my father alone in Kansas, then traveled the last 300 miles with a wagon train of strangers. I can ride, shoot moderately well, and survive whatever your rough country has to offer. Isaac studied her face, seeking any sign of uncertainty. Finding none, he sighed. One night. You can stay at the boarding house tonight on my $1. Tomorrow, if you still want to fulfill this foolish contract, we'll see about getting you a horse. Hannah nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. I'll be ready at dawn. True to her word, Hannah was waiting outside the boarding house when Isaac arrived the next morning, a small carpet bag containing her possessions at her feet. She wore a practical riding skirt and jacket of faded brown, her honey blonde hair braided and pinned beneath a simple hat. Last chance to reconsider, Isaac said by way of greeting, leading a dappled mare he'd purchased at first light. The contract remains in effect, Hannah finished firmly, appraising the mare with an experienced eye. She's lovely. Thank you. They rode north out of Silver Creek as the sun crested the eastern mountains, casting golden light across the valley. Isaac set a steady pace, expecting complaints that never came. Hannah rode well, her back straight, her hands confident on the reins. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable but wary, like two wolves circling before deciding whether to fight or hunt together. By midday, they'd left the established trail, turning northwest toward the higher country. Isaac finally broke the silence. My uncle had a claim up near the Kootenai River. Abandoned it after my aunt died. I aim to rebuild the cabin, work the small gold deposit he found. It's isolated. Nearest settlement is 3 days' ride in good weather. Hannah nodded. Why there? Seems you could stake a claim closer to civilization if you wanted. Isaac's jaw tightened. I've had my fill of civilization. War showed me enough of mankind's nature. The war changed many things, Hannah said quietly. My father never recovered from Shiloh. The debts came after, when the drinking started. Isaac glanced at her, sensing the weight behind her simple statement. That why you signed the indenture? His debts. He was still my father, she replied, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. They made camp that evening beside a clear stream, with the distant peaks of the Bitterroots painted purple against the sunset. Isaac built a small fire while Hannah unpacked provisions from her saddlebag. Not the basic hardtack and jerky he'd expected, but cornmeal, bacon, and even a small pouch of coffee. The boarding house cook was generous, she explained, seeing his surprise. Especially when I offered to help with the breakfast rush. That night, as they sat across the fire eating cornbread and bacon, Isaac found himself watching Hannah's hands as she worked, efficient and graceful. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. You still think I'll slow you down, she said, not a question but a statement. I think the North Country breaks most men, Isaac replied honestly. I've never seen what it does to women. Hannah's lips curved in a small smile. Perhaps you've been looking at the wrong women, Mr. Whitman. The journey north took 12 days, slowed by spring rains that turned trails to mud and swelled the rivers they needed to cross. Through it all, Hannah proved herself as resilient as she'd claimed. She rode without complaint through downpours, helped make camp in sodden conditions, and even shot a grouse for their dinner when supplies ran low. What surprised Isaac most, however, was how quickly he became accustomed to her presence. The silence he'd cultivated for years now often gave way to conversation as they rode, about the land, about the wildlife, occasionally about the lives they'd left behind, though both skirted carefully around their deeper wounds. You're not what I expected, he admitted one evening as they sat beneath a crude lean-to, watching rain drip from pine boughs. "And what did you expect, Mr. Whitman?" Hannah asked, her fingers busy mending a tear in her skirt. Isaac considered the question. Someone weaker. Someone who'd regret their bargain by now. Hannah's needle paused. "Do you regret yours?" "No," he answered, surprising himself with his certainty. "Though I still think $1 was highway robbery. You're worth at least $1.50. Her startled laugh warmed something in his chest that he thought had gone cold years ago. They reached the claim on a clear May morning. The cabin stood in a small clearing beside a swift-flowing creek, its roof partially collapsed, its door hanging by a single hinge. Behind it rose dense forest. Before it stretched a meadow dotted with wildflowers. The beauty of the place caught in Hannah's throat. "It's wonderful," she breathed. Isaac frowned at the dilapidated cabin. "It's a ruin. It's possibility," Hannah countered, dismounting and approaching the structure. "The foundation is sound. The walls need work, but they're standing. By winter, this could be a proper home." Home. The word struck Isaac like a physical blow. He hadn't had a home since before the war. He'd had shelters, camps, temporary lodgings, but not a home. "It's shelter," he corrected, unloading their supplies. "Nothing more." Hannah gave him a look that suggested she knew better but wouldn't argue. "Then let's make it proper shelter before nightfall." They worked side by side through the day, clearing debris from the cabin's interior, patching the worst of the roof with canvas until proper repairs could be made. By sunset, they had created a habitable corner with their bedrolls separated by a blanket hung from the rafters for privacy. That night, as the mountain chill crept in, Isaac stared at the rafters above, listening to Hannah's steady breathing from the other side of the blanket. For the first time in years, he felt the strangest sensation, contentment. "This changes nothing," he whispered to himself. "She's here to work off a debt. That's all." But even as he formed the thought, he knew it for the lie it was. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Isaac spent his days reconstructing the cabin, occasionally working the small placer claim in the creek that yielded enough gold to justify supply runs to the distant trading post. Hannah transformed the clearing around the cabin, establishing a garden with seeds she'd brought in her carpet bag, taming the wilderness into something habitable. Each evening they shared meals, their conversations growing less guarded. Isaac found himself speaking of things he hadn't discussed in years, his childhood in Missouri, his brief time at university before the war called him away, the brother he'd lost at Antietam. "I was studying engineering," he admitted one night as they sat on the newly built porch, watching fireflies dance in the meadow. "Had notions of building bridges and railways to connect the country." "You still could," Hannah said softly. Isaac shook his head. "That was a different man. Before I saw what men will do to one another over ideals and cotton." Hannah was silent for a long moment. "My mother used to say that living well is the best revenge against all that's wrong with the world." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was," Hannah agreed, a sadness in her voice that made Isaac realize she'd rarely spoken of her mother in their weeks together. "What happened to her?" he asked gently. Hannah gazed out at the darkening meadow. "Typhoid. I was 16. Father was already away with the Tennessee Volunteers. By the time he returned, I'd buried her and managed the farm alone for 8 months." Isaac studied her profile in the fading light, understanding more clearly now the quiet strength that had carried her through their journey. "You've been alone a long time." "As have you," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "Though I wonder if either of us needs to be anymore." The air between them changed, charged with something neither was ready to name. Isaac stood abruptly. "It's late. I'll check the horses." He strode toward the small corral they'd built, his heart hammering in his chest. Hannah's words had stripped away his careful defenses, revealing the truth he'd been denying. He no longer wanted to be alone. More specifically, he no longer wanted to be without her. The realization terrified him. As spring gave way to summer, the cabin and surrounding homestead flourished under their combined efforts. Isaac completed a proper roof, added a stone chimney, and built sturdy furniture from pine and cedar. Hannah's garden yielded its first vegetables, supplementing their diet of game and fish from the creek. To Isaac's surprise, a few neighboring homesteaders discovered their presence. The Andersons, an elderly couple who lived 2 hours' ride to the east, began to visit occasionally, bringing seeds and cuttings for Hannah's garden. The Hansen brothers, Norwegian trappers with a cabin to the north, stopped by when passing through, trading pelts for Hannah's bread and jams. You've created a social circle in the wilderness, Isaac remarked one evening after the Andersons had departed, leaving behind a basket of early apples and news from the outside world. Hannah smiled as she arranged the apples in a bowl she'd shaped from clay found by the creek. Humans need other humans, Isaac. Even reluctant ones like you. He noticed she'd stopped calling him Mr. Whitman weeks ago, just as he'd begun thinking of their shelter as home rather than the cabin. I'm not reluctant, he protested, helping her store the leftover venison stew. I'm selective. Hannah laughed, the sound bright in the warm kitchen. Is that why you threatened to shoot Matthew Hansen for offering me a carving last month? He was being presumptuous, Isaac muttered, though he couldn't help but smile at the memory of the burly Norwegian's hasty retreat. Their easy domesticity was interrupted in late July when Isaac returned from hunting to find a stranger's horse tethered outside the cabin. His rifle ready, he approached cautiously, only to hear Hannah's laugh from inside, followed by a man's deep chuckle. He pushed open the door to find Hannah serving coffee to Sheriff Martin from Silver Creek, the same weathered lawman who'd overseen her indenture auction months before. Whitman, the sheriff greeted him, rising from the table. Quite a place you've built here. Sheriff, Isaac acknowledged tensely. Long ride from Silver Creek. Worth every mile, Martin replied. Tracking a gang that's been hitting mining camps. 3 men, led by a fellow with a distinctive scar across his nose. Ring any bells? Isaac's stomach tightened. Dalton, from the Silver Nugget. The very same, Martin confirmed. Been raiding up and down the territory since his saloon burned down in May. Seems he's working his way north. Hannah paled slightly, and Isaac moved instinctively closer to her. You think they're headed this way? Hard to say, the sheriff admitted. But they hit the Wilkins place 30 miles south yesterday. Took gold, horses, and left Wilkins with a cracked skull. He looked pointedly at Hannah. They've taken women, too. 2 so far. A cold fury settled in Isaac's chest. If they come here, they'll find more than they bargained for, Martin finished, eyeing Isaac's rifle. Still, thought you should be warned. He drained his coffee cup. I'd best be on my way. Want to reach Anderson's place before dark. After the sheriff departed, a heavy silence fell between them. Hannah moved about the cabin, straightening things that didn't need straightening, her usual composure visibly shaken. We should leave, Isaac said finally. At least until Martin captures them. Hannah stopped, surprised. Leave our home. Everything we've built. None of it matters if you're. Isaac couldn't finish the thought. I can't protect you against 3 armed men, Hannah. You don't have to face them alone, she said, her voice steadying. I told you I can shoot. And this is our home, Isaac. I won't be driven from another home by fear. The fierce determination in her eyes stirred something in him. Pride, admiration, and something deeper he still hesitated to name. Then we prepare, he decided, and pray they choose another path. For the next 2 weeks, they lived in a state of constant vigilance. Isaac taught Hannah to improve her shooting, set up warning signals around the property, and reinforced the cabin doors and shutters. Each night, he slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, something was changing between them. The careful distance they'd maintained blurred as danger pressed close. Their hands lingered when passing tools or dishes. Their eyes held longer in conversation. The blanket that had divided their sleeping spaces was folded away one night without discussion, their bedrolls remaining separate but within arm's reach of each other. On a sweltering August afternoon, as they worked together to preserve the garden's bounty, Hannah paused, wiping perspiration from her brow. Isaac, she said hesitantly, may I ask you something? He looked up from the jars he was sealing. Of course. That day in Silver Creek, why did you do it? Why spend even $1 on a stranger's indenture? The question caught him off guard. They'd never discussed his impulsive action, had simply moved forward from it into their shared life. I don't know, he answered honestly. I saw you standing there, refusing to break even when everything was broken around you. And something in me couldn't walk away. Hannah set down the tomato she'd been slicing. In all these months, I've never properly thanked you. Not just for the $1, but for everything after. This home. This life. You've more than repaid any debt, Isaac said, suddenly uncomfortable with her gratitude. Your contract, it doesn't matter anymore. Hasn't for a long time. I know, Hannah said softly. I stay now because I choose to. Because this is where I want to be. She hesitated, then added, with you. The air between them stilled. Isaac stood, crossing to her in 2 strides. His hand, tentative at first, reached to brush a strand of honey-blonde hair from her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his fingers. Hannah, the sharp crack of a branch breaking outside froze them both. Isaac pulled away, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. Hannah reached for the shotgun they kept loaded by the door. Could be deer, she whispered, though her expression said she believed otherwise. Stay inside, Isaac ordered, moving to the window. Carefully, he peered around the edge of the curtain Hannah had sewn from flour sacks. 3 men on horseback were approaching through the meadow, riding slowly, confidently. The lead rider's face was partially hidden by a slouch hat, but the scar across his nose was clearly visible even at a distance. Dalton, Isaac breathed. And his gang. Hannah's face paled, but her hands remained steady on the shotgun. What do we do? Isaac calculated their options rapidly. The cabin was defensible, but they were outnumbered. If they barricaded themselves, the outlaws might simply wait them out, or worse, set fire to the structure. We meet them outside, he decided. In the open. I know these types. They're cowards at heart, used to preying on the weak. They don't expect resistance. Hannah nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. Together, then. No, Isaac said firmly. You stay on the porch, in the shadows. If things go wrong, you'll have clear shots from there. But let me try to send them away first. He stepped outside into the blazing afternoon sun, rifle held casually but ready. Hannah positioned herself in the shadows of the porch, the shotgun out of sight but within reach. Dalton and his men reined in 20 yards from the cabin. The outlaw's eyes narrowed as he recognized Isaac. Well, look what we found, boys, he drawled. The dollar man himself. His gaze swept past Isaac to the cabin. And where's that pretty piece of merchandise you stole from me? I suggest you move on, Dalton, Isaac replied evenly. Sheriff Martin's looking for you. He was here 2 days ago. One of Dalton's companions, a weasel-faced man with rotting teeth, spat tobacco juice. Martin's chasing his tail 10 miles south. We passed his camp this morning. Dalton nodded, a slow smile spreading across his scarred face. We've been watching this place since yesterday. Waited for you to separate, but you two stick mighty close. His hand moved to his holster. Now here's how this goes. You hand over whatever gold you've panned, any cash you got, and the woman. Do that, we might let you live. And if I decline your generous offer? Isaac asked, his finger tensing on the rifle's trigger. Dalton's smile vanished. Then we kill you slow, take the woman anyway, and burn this pretty little place to the ground. Isaac sighed, as if considering the options. Well, now, that's a problem. Because the woman you're referring to is no one's property. And everything else here. He raised the rifle in one smooth motion, aiming at Dalton's chest. We built together. The tension hung in the air for 3 heartbeats before Dalton lunged for his pistol. Isaac fired, the shot striking the outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around in his saddle. The weasel-faced man drew next, but before he could aim, the boom of Hannah's shotgun split the air. The outlaw screamed, clutching his arm as buckshot tore through it. The third man, younger, with a patchy beard, fired wildly, his bullet splintering the wood of the porch post near Hannah. Isaac's second shot caught him in the thigh, toppling him from his horse. Dalton, bleeding but still dangerous, had managed to draw his pistol with his uninjured hand. He fired at Isaac, the bullet grazing his side in a line of fire. Isaac staggered but remained standing, working the lever of his rifle for another shot. Before he could fire, another shotgun blast roared from the porch. Hannah had reloaded with remarkable speed, and this shot struck Dalton's horse. The animal reared in pain and terror, throwing the outlaw to the ground. The brief, violent exchange ended as suddenly as it had begun. Dalton lay groaning in the dirt, his companions similarly disabled but alive. The horses had scattered in the chaos, galloping for the edge of the meadow. Hannah rushed to Isaac's side, her face white with concern as she saw the blood seeping through his shirt. You're hit. Just a graze, he assured her, though the pain was significant. Help me tie them up before they recover their wits. Using rope from the corral, they secured the 3 outlaws to the porch posts. The young one sobbed and begged, while the weasel-faced man cursed steadily. Dalton, His face gray with pain and fury, simply glared. "Sheriff Martin will be pleased," Hannah remarked as she tightened the last knot. "Though we'll need to retrieve one of their horses to fetch him." "Tomorrow," Isaac said, suddenly lightheaded as the rush of combat faded. "We'll manage until then." Hannah guided him inside, forcing him to sit while she examined his wound. The bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. With gentle hands, she cleaned and bandaged it, her touch causing a different kind of ache in his chest. "You could have been killed," she said quietly as she worked. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "But I wasn't," he interrupted. "We're both alive, and those men won't hurt anyone else." When she finished, he caught her hand in his. "You were magnificent out there. I've seen battle-hardened soldiers with less courage." Hannah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I wasn't going to lose you. Not when I've only just found you." Something broke open in Isaac's chest, the final wall around his heart crumbling. He pulled her gently to him, mindful of his injury, and kissed her with all the feeling he'd kept contained for months. She responded instantly, her arms circling his neck, her lips soft and yielding against his. When they finally parted, breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have since that first day in Silver Creek, when you stood so proud despite everything." "And I've loved you," Hannah whispered, "since you offered me freedom and I chose to stay." The next morning, Isaac rode one of the outlaws' retrieved horses to the Anderson homestead, where word was sent to Sheriff Martin. 2 days later, the lawman arrived with a deputy to collect Dalton and his men, all of whom would face hanging for their crimes. As they watched the sheriff's party disappear down the trail, Hannah slipped her hand into Isaac's. "What happens now?" she asked. Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Now, Hannah Fairchild, if you're willing, I'd like to make an honest woman of you. Not because of any contract or obligation, but because I cannot imagine a day of my life without you in it." Hannah's smile was radiant. "I believe Reverend Peterson visits the Andersons every third Sunday. That gives us 2 weeks to prepare." Isaac laughed, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that made his injured side protest, but his heart sing. 2 weeks it is. They were married on a golden September afternoon, with the Andersons, the Hanson brothers, Sheriff Martin, and 3 other neighboring families as witnesses. Hannah wore a new dress of deep blue calico, with wildflowers from their meadow woven into her honey-blonde hair. Isaac, in a new shirt and polished boots, trembled slightly as he placed his mother's ring on Hannah's finger. "I never believed I could find home in another person," he said in his vows. "You've taught me that the heart, like this wild land, can be settled with enough care and courage." Hannah's eyes shone as she replied, "You purchased my freedom for $1, but what you truly gave me was the chance to choose my own path. I choose you, Isaac Whitman, today and all the days to come." As winter settled over their mountain home, the cabin glowed with warmth and life. Hannah's skilled hands had transformed it into a true home, with curtains at the windows, colorful quilts on the bed they now shared, and the sense of home-cooked meals filling the air. Isaac had expanded the structure, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area in preparation for the family they hoped to create. On Christmas Eve, as snow fell gently outside their window, Isaac presented Hannah with a small wooden box he'd carved himself. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the intricate pattern of flowers he'd etched into the lid. "Open it," he urged, watching her face. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a silver dollar, the same one he'd tossed to the auctioneer in Silver Creek. Hannah looked up, confused. "You kept this?" "The sheriff returned it to me when he took Dalton away," Isaac explained. "Said it was still in the town records as payment for your contract." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "I thought we should keep it, to remember how our story began." Hannah closed the box gently, then set it aside to wrap her arms around her husband. "Our story began long before that dollar changed hands, Isaac. It began the moment you decided the frontier didn't have to be faced alone. The moment you chose hope over isolation." As the fire crackled in the hearth and snow blanketed their mountain sanctuary, Isaac held his wife close, marveling at how completely his life had transformed. He had come to the wilderness seeking escape, believing that love and connection were luxuries the frontier wouldn't allow. Instead, he had found Hannah, and with her, the The truth that even in the harshest places, the human heart could not only survive but flourish. The lone wolf had found his mate, the wanderer his home. And in the years to come, as their family grew and their homestead prospered, the silver dollar remained in its wooden box, a simple token that had purchased not just a woman's freedom, but a man's heart as well.